Are we about to witness the death of Nvidia after DeepSeek released an AI model allegedly trained on just $5 million, a number that is staggering to most people in the AI community? And this open source model is now the #1 model on Hugging Face. We'll talk about all of these things. We'll talk about some of the hysteria that you were seeing on social media that DeepSeek R1 is triggering. And what does it mean for OpenAI? What does it mean for Google? What does it mean for Microsoft? And maybe more importantly, what does it mean for Nvidia? Are some of the claims from the company, is it exaggerated? Is this $5 million pre-training and total run to train the model that is now outperforming most of the other models on the market? Is this number exaggerated? We'll dive into that. The news media is grabbing the headlines. Can those be trusted? Also, newsflash to anybody that's older than maybe about 30 years old is that computing prices tend to go down. We'll look at what historically has happened to computing prices over at one of the world's largest computing factories, and that is AWS. And newsflash, they tend to go down. We'll talk about some of the propaganda that could be coming out of the Chinese government, believe it or not, and that maybe some of these claims coming from DeepSeek are exaggerated. We'll also talk about the, quote, backdoor, where some of Nvidia's products are going and how they could conceivably be helping to train models like this coming out of China. Talk about Sam Altman. This guy is easily one of the most easily hated persons in technology, and maybe he's screwing things up. And we'll draw conclusions, not only from a China perspective, but also here in the United States. And we'll also discuss, does this impact some of the massive spending commitments that we've seen from big tech? Just over the past week, we had Mark Zuckerberg committing $65 billion. You had that big Project Stargate, which threw around $500 billion numbers, and now we're getting more modest $19 billion numbers. And what does this all mean for Nvidia? Not only for the earnings estimates, which I've noticed have taken a tumble a little bit. Talk about that. But what does it mean for the stock, which year to date is still up 6% and still over the past year is up 132%? Can Nvidia stock continue to outperform? We'll discuss that, and we'll also look at these technically like we always do. What is going on, investors? Hopefully guys are doing well out there. And notice I say what is going on, investors. If you're looking for a deep dive into DeepSeek and how it handles this math model and this query and this question and what happened in China and what happens over here and what happens with this query, go to the tech blogs, go to Reddit. This channel is for people that are trying to make money. We're not trying to sit behind our computer all day and play with computer models. We're trying to make money. And if you're not interested in make money, go sit behind your computer screen and fondle computer models. The rest of us are trying to make money. But we do have to get deep into the weeds a little bit as it relates to some of the technology and some of the hype that has been surrounding this DeepSeek model. Hugging Face is a repository of AI models, and they have kind of a ranking system as well. And these rankings fluctuate depending on what models come onto the market and the needs of the community. And right now, DeepSeek R1 is absolutely red hot. But the key thing to understand is it is both kind of a proprietary model where you do have access to DeepSeek through kind of a web-based interface. Now, it doesn't cost anything, at least on the kind of the regular user side. So you can access this just as a human, just like you would ChatGPT or Gemini or Claude's Anthropic or any of these models. You can come to DeepSeek. Now, you have to understand this is a Chinese company. So the information that you put in here has to factor that in mind. But the fact is we have hundreds of millions of Americans that get on TikTok every single day. And so I don't think the average American actually cares about that. So we have to keep that in mind as well. But it's also an open source model. What's very impressive, and probably the most impressive thing that I've seen around DeepSeek, is you are able to download this model and run it locally, which means I don't need to go to DeepSeek. I don't even need an internet connection. Now, in some cases, you might need a rather powerful computer. You might need to stack a couple of Macintosh computers with their most powerful chips to run the full model locally, but that is possible. And we'll talk about that when we get to our conclusions. and that large language models, that might actually be the future of large language models. Not these general purpose models, which basically will answer any question from relating to dinosaurs to maybe current events, but maybe something that is run locally and more specific. I'll give you specific examples of how I use large language models, and I'm actually using the ones that are more fine-tuned to a specific genre or a specific subject rather than the general purpose models. We'll also talk about the fact that if you are still paying $20 a month for ChatGPT, you're crazy, because there are plenty of models on the market that outperform or at least perform it relatively well. Now, the other thing that you have to put aside is there's a lot of hype and hysteria around these types of things. And certainly if you get on X or Reddit, people are engagement farming and they're saying that they're blown away and their mind is blown over DeepSeek. Well, they said the same thing about OpenAI when O1 was released or whatever that is. And oh my God, my feed was filled with Claude 3.5 Sonnet and how amazing it was. Now that's down here. And in 2 weeks, there'll be a different model and something else will come to grab the attention of the engagement farmers, and they'll be doing this thing. But there is some heat and there's some interesting aspects of this release from an investment perspective. That is because DeepSeek released a white paper that had a stunning admission and a stunning revelation. The fact that their total cost to train and launch DeepSeek version 3, which is the latest model that they released, cost them just $5.57 million, not billion dollars, but $5.57 million, which is dramatically lower than you can imagine when we're tossing around numbers surrounding Nvidia, OpenAI, and SoftBank going to spend billions of dollars on a Stargate project. You've got Mark Zuckerberg just this year going to spend $65 billion on a single data center. Not on all the data centers that he's going to build, just one of them. He's going to spend $65 billion. Here's a very capable model, and if you play around with it, whether it's on a local machine or on the DeepSeek website, it's very, very capable. And it costs just $5.57 million. Now, there's some caveats here just in the company's own white paper. They say right here at the bottom, it's not highlighted on any social media, but it does say, note that the aforementioned cost of the $5.57 million includes only the official training of version 3. So it doesn't include any R&D that came prior to that. It also excludes the costs associated with prior research, like I just said, and experiments, architecture, algorithms, or data. It also doesn't factor in, this is something that you do have to factor in a little bit, is DeepSeek was basically trained on OpenAI. So they scraped OpenAI with different types of results, and they used the API of OpenAI to train DeepSeek. So in some cases, the $5.57 million was actually subsidized by OpenAI. Now, as we move down the road, a year from now, 2 years from now, 3 years from now, and because DeepSeek is an open source model, you also have Llama models out there from Meta, and you have many other open source models, the cost to get started to launch a new large language model is going to increasingly go lower and lower and lower. And newsflash for all of you, that has actually been the norm across technology for as long as I've been alive, and really for as long as civilization has existed. Here's historical pricing for AWS, which is your traditional cloud computing. This only goes from 2006 to 2016, so you get a 10-year view of how cost over at AWS went from about 15 cents down to closer to 1 cent over a 10-year time. So anybody that thought that training these large language models was only going to continue to get more and more expensive really ignores a lot of facts. It's also possible there are some facts underneath the surface of this $5.57 million. According to numerous sources, including Dylan Patel of Semi-Analysis, in fact, he published this back in November of last year. And so this is well before the hype. And this is before a lot of people kind of fell over themselves this week over DeepSeek. He says DeepSeek has over 50,000 Hopper GPUs. To be clear, people need to stop acting like they only have 10,000 A100 cluster, which is slightly a dumber down version of a Hopper GPU. He does say that they are a very talented research team, but they aren't doing this with that many fewer GPUs. In fact, a 50,000 cluster of Hopper GPUs would be more than what is believed to be used to train GPT-4. Now, some of you might be wondering, why is DeepSeek hiding the fact that they might have a 50,000 Hopper GPU stockpile? And why are they touting the fact that they spent just $5 million training DeepSeek version 3? Well, that is because there's sanctions here in the United States that were put on for many, many years by the former Biden administration that restricted the high-end GPUs made by Nvidia and other companies from entering the country of China. So it's actually, and we'll put this in quotes, illegal for China to acquire Hopper GPUs, certainly in the numbers that Dylan Patel says that they actually have. This would actually be illegal. Now, what are the consequences of this? These are sanctions put by the United States. China has its own laws, and certainly if you break U.S. law in China, well, the United States would actually have to come over there and actually do something about it. So the fact that Chinese companies have access to Nvidia GPUs that they really shouldn't have shouldn't come as a surprise to anybody. And also, if you open up the financials of Nvidia's earnings reports, you do see some potential, quote, backdoors of these GPUs entering the country of China. And many in the industry believe, and this goes back before the last 24 hours. This goes back, 2 or 3 years, that the country of Singapore is essentially a middleman from Nvidia shipping GPUs to Singapore, which is not covered under sanctions put in place by the Biden administration. Those GPUs make their way into the country of China. You see here for the last 9 months ended in 2023, $4.5 billion worth of GPUs made it into the country of Singapore. That number has accelerated to over $17 billion. Now, I'm certainly no expert in the Singapore tech community, but seems to me if they are buying the second most GPUs behind the United States, that there could be potentially some hanky-panky going on. You still have the country of China shipping in over $11.5 billion of GPUs over the past 9 months. And so they are still making their way in there. They tend to be these, quote, dumbed down versions. But what we are finding is companies like DeepSeek are still going to be able to use those GPUs and use shortcuts like pre-training their models, scraping data from OpenAI, scraping outputs from OpenAI, and then layering on their own computer science and their own technical abilities. And so this should not come as a surprise to just about anyone out there. So when the media and the Twitter headlines are running with the headlines that it outpaces OpenAI at 3% of the cost, just understand that the white paper that the company released kind of outlines that it doesn't necessarily tell the full story. And also industry experts believe that there's plenty of backdoored GPUs that have made it into China through Singapore and other avenues. And so this number is probably not as what it seems. And so you had a lot of doom and gloom analysis as it relates to Nvidia. And then, oh my gosh, the stock is probably going to crash in the coming weeks. Talk about that from a stock perspective when we get there. Now, Sam Altman, maybe he's dropped the ball, folks. OpenAI's initial mission was actually to do something like DeepSeek, come out with these models and have it be open and open source and have a lot of people take advantage of that. Now DeepSeek is kind of coming underneath that. You also have Meta and their Llama models also doing relatively the same thing. And so maybe Sam Altman is kind of dropping the ball. So I certainly don't want to make it seem like we're just trashing DeepSeek and we're trashing their accomplishments. Their accomplishments are fantastic. And maybe we should put a little bit more criticism on Sam Altman, who should have done this already himself, since that was the original mission of OpenAI. Now, when we look at the country of China and AI, China was always going to build its own AI models, okay? Just like they have their own e-commerce websites, just like they have their own electric vehicle companies, just like virtually all industry in China tends to be homegrown. And that's not a criticism, that's actually a compliment. I like that China actually homegrowns a lot of their own industries, and they give a lot of the native companies their advantages over American companies. Now, as an investor, that kind of sucks. I'd love for companies like Starbucks and Nike and Apple and Meta and Google to have their services widely available in the country of China. But the bottom line is they gate off the country and they give access and preferential treatment and even investment and all those types of things to Chinese native companies. And there's nothing wrong with that. So you had to believe the company was going to build its own AI just based on the government structure, the types of questions that the AI is able to answer based on their government system there. Well, it has to not be able to say certain things. Here in the United States, our AIs can say almost anything. In China, it's probably slightly more restricted, okay? The other thing we have to keep in mind with DeepSeek, again, as X users are literally flipping out on this, and you've got all this engagement farming, and they were doing the same thing over Claude. They were doing the same thing with OpenAI models. OpenAI will release an update, and it'll be like fractionally better than DeepSeek, and everybody will flip out. So those are the things you have to understand. But the broader thing is DeepSeek good? Yes. Is it interesting? Yes. Does it run locally? Is it open source? Are these all really cool things? Yes. But did it cure cancer? No, it didn't. Does it do anything that we really actually haven't seen before? No, it didn't. And it was actually trained using OpenAI. And so it didn't actually do anything that amazing and that groundbreaking. This isn't like ChatGPT being launched 2 or 3 years ago. We have to also understand that the cost savings are likely exaggerated. So you have the media running with headlines, but when you dig into the white paper, it basically says that this doesn't include a ton of R&D. You don't know what those costs are. Again, you have industry experts saying that they have access to a huge number of GPUs, and you can just look at Nvidia's financials and say, all these GPUs going to Singapore, those are not being used by native Singapore companies and tech companies located in Singapore. Those are going somewhere else. You can almost guarantee that. And the bottom line is the people that are shocked by this were the people that were paying $20 a month for ChatGPT. You should have canceled your subscription to that of several months ago. It's not worth it. There's going to be plenty of free models, plenty of free options for this. And that kind of brings me over to my next point, is that large language models, particularly general purpose ones like DeepSeek, like OpenAI, these might not be it, guys. These general purpose models that are supposed to do everything and have artificial general intelligence, all this type of things, that might not be it. That might not be a very good business model, might not be a very good investment. Also, large language models running locally, that might end up being the big business. The large language model running on your iPhone or on your toaster or on your car or in your refrigerator or in your living room or your TV or your Xbox or your PlayStation. Those large language models might be really, really interesting. As it relates to general purpose large language models, what I am finding that what I am paying for, and just to give you a story here, is I don't pay for the large language models that just do everything. I'll rather use Grok. You can use Claude. OpenAI is basically free at this point. There's really no reason to pay for this. But what I do pay for is very specialized models. There's some tools as it relates to YouTube that are very interesting. They pick your titles for you. They pick your descriptions. They do these different types of things. And as I've used these very specialized language models, just tailored to a specific skill, titling a YouTube video, I've seen dramatic results. And so those are definitely worth paying for, but I don't see any reason to pay for these general purpose large language models. And DeepSeek's business model of giving this stuff away for free, whether it cost them $5 million or $50 million or $5 billion, still not a good business model, and it's not a good investment. And I think we've seen that start to play out, that these large language general purpose models just might not be a very good business model. Now, it starts to get related to Nvidia. Is running the AI application or inference is really where a lot of the money is going to be made. Yes, there's going to be plenty of large language models that are going to be run locally, but we start getting to higher performance computing and we start to tackle the tasks that have yet been tackled by large language models, curing large diseases, those types of things, solving the mysteries of the universe. Those are going to require a lot of computing power. And that's where a lot of the money is likely to be made. And obviously, you still continue to need Nvidia chips. If AI applications started at the training stage and the launch stage and no one used them, I would be incredibly alarmed by Nvidia's results. I would say, wow, there's all this spending on large language models in terms of training and launching, but nobody's using the product. I don't think we're seeing that. In fact, these products are barely being used by anybody. And so we can start to extrapolate that down the road, our moms, our grandmas, our kids are going to be using these models on a daily basis. That is going to expand the applications that are using AI, which expands inference uses, which obviously expands NVIDIA's business model. So to sum up that point, more large language models like DeepSeek, OpenAI, Gemini, Claude, the fact that you have this massive amount of competition, that actually means more inference, more training, more testing, more competition. That probably means more NVIDIA rather than less. Now, you also have a 3-stage rollout to any type of technological advancement. It happened with personal computers, and we're just going over the past maybe 30 years or so. Started with personal computers. What was the hottest item back in the 70s and 80s? It was a personal computer, okay? And they actually were very, very expensive. Now you can pick up a personal computer. You might even get one for free, or you get one at a super low cost. Then comes the software phase. In the 70s and 80s, you had Microsoft start to design software for the hardware. Now software is some of the most profitable business models in the world. And then finally, you have this everywhere phase, where again, the hardware and the software is everywhere, and we've got computers on our desk, we've got a computer in our pocket, we've got it on our wrist, our kids are using it at school, our grandma's using it, everybody's using it. Remember, we have a hardware, software, everywhere phase, and I would say in AI, we're still transferring out of the hardware, software phase. We haven't even gotten to everywhere. The hardware is still what most people talk about. Nvidia GPUs, data centers, the investment is still happening in that area. You don't see a lot of investment in personal computer manufacturing or innovation there. That is because that business has been squeezed. And so at some point, NVIDIA's business is going to get squeezed. We're going to move to the software phase, everywhere phase. Maybe DeepSeek is showing us that we're getting closer to this middle software phase. And that should make you excited as an investor, because the software phase is where you have some real exponential growth from a profit perspective. You just look at software companies over the past 20 years, 25, 30 years, they've been some of the best performing. And you can include companies like Google in the software. I mean, Google search is basically a piece of software. Even social media platforms like TikTok and Meta and Instagram and all these sites, this is basically software. So we're moving to that phase with AI, and it can be really, really profitable. So don't be scared so much about the hype. This is a natural progression as it relates to technology. Now, we're still going to have massive spending this year. Mark Zuckerberg saying he's going to spend out $65 billion on a single data center that might cover the significant portion of Manhattan. I was in Manhattan late last year, and that's a big project that he's got. But he's going to roll that out really quickly. You also have that Stargate project announcement as well. I've done short form videos on these topics, and so we won't cover them super in depth here. I assume most of you are understanding about the impact of this going forward. These investments are going to continue. Now, one thing that I did notice, and this was interesting, not a lot of people are going to be talking about this, but we have Nvidia. We have a new round of earnings coming. Now, Nvidia doesn't report their earnings for another month, but we'll hear from AMD, we'll hear from Intel, maybe less important in the semiconductor industry, at least from the AI standpoint, as probably AMD and certainly Nvidia. We'll hear from others as well. We'll also hear from big tech next week. Okay, we've got Amazon, we've got Meta in particular, Microsoft as well, Google. We'll hear from these companies over the next week or so, and they'll give us a clear picture on this spending. And now, obviously, this is commitments verbally, but this spending will likely happen very, very quickly. And I don't think anything that has happened with DeepSeek over the past week or 2 weeks, and again, all of this was known back in November. A lot of people are finding out about DeepSeek, and we're certainly talking about it here on the channel right now. But this was all known, and this was all stuff that Mark Zuckerberg knew before he announced $65 billion of spend. And you also have Stargate. In many ways, this accelerates these companies' need to boost their capabilities. And again, DeepSeek is good. It does some good stuff, but it didn't cure cancer. If it cured cancer, my God, Nvidia stock would probably be down, 10 points, 100 points at this point. But it didn't. It did things marginally better, and people that actually can go beyond the headlines and connect a few dots can see that the headlines are probably very, very misleading. But what's not misleading, I have seen a tightening of earnings estimates over at Nvidia. And this is really the bottom line for you as an investor. Is an investor makes money by the company not only meeting expectations, and expectations are set by Wall Street. Think about Nvidia like an athlete, okay? So you have Patrick Mahomes playing, you got football this weekend. The expectations of Patrick Mahomes is to win the Super Bowl, not go to the Super Bowl. It's to win the Super Bowl. So he has very high expectations. He could play incredibly well, but if they don't win the Super Bowl, then he came underneath expectations. So with Nvidia, the expectations are for this company to win the Super Bowl. And I'm seeing as we move out into later this year, start to get into Q3, Q4, we saw a very wide spread in terms of the expectations. Some people were expecting Nvidia stock to crash. Others were expecting it to soar. We're seeing those expectations start to tighten up. $45 to $60 billion as we get into Q3, get into Q4. This was like 30 to 100 billion. It's tightened to like 47 to 78. So we're starting to center around $45-50 billion worth of revenue for Nvidia, and then you extrapolate 70% gross margins for this company. So you're going to have 200 some odd billion dollars worth of revenue, probably for the full year, somewhere in there at 70% gross margin. You got about a $3 trillion valuation on this one, or actually $3.5 trillion valuation. So it's not cheap, okay? Air quotes. It's certainly not a value stock. But the upside certainly comes if they come exceedingly over this $50 billion, which is now the new expectation for the company. And based on what we're seeing in the environment, and also the fact that DeepSeek is good, but it didn't cure cancer, will continue the investment. And also you have a lot more AI applications and competition in this space, and that these companies are at an all-out war. And we actually haven't seen this in tech in probably 20 years. There hasn't been an all-out war. We might have saw it in the social media era. There was some battling for supremacy. You had Google Plus, and you had all these companies trying to get into social media, and only one or two ended up winning. With AI, we're not sure who's going to win. OpenAI is run by Sam Altman, who is a little bit weird, makes some bad decisions in my opinion. You've got Elon Musk kind of in there as well. You've got Google, Microsoft. You've got all these companies battling out. You've got startups in China that are able to take market share right away with a snap of a finger. This is incredibly exciting, and this is incredibly exciting for Nvidia since they are the backbone of all of that competition. So I actually expect things to not only stay good for Nvidia, but to probably get even better. Now, speaking of getting better, the SOXX ETF, if you've been watching the show, you should be in this one. We've said you should buy this one for like 2 months now. It's been hovering at the bottom of the channel. Should be up on this one. It's moving back up here to a high that it made back in October, up here at about 234. Like to see for this one to get above that. We're obviously moving into earnings, those types of things. Could move it one way or another. Now, if you do have a profit on this one thing that you could do is continue to move up your stop loss. Again, this is if it's a shorter term trade for you. I tend to play these ETFs more as a shorter term trade. I'm moving up my stop loss, guaranteeing myself a profit on that one. The SMH, slightly different position. It obviously has higher concentration, I think, in TSM, Broadcom, and Nvidia. Those stocks are all soaring a little higher than the broader semiconductor market, where you're looking at AMD and Intel and others. They're more towards kind of maybe a bottom of a range. This one's setting up at the top. It looks like it wants to make a new higher high. And Nvidia, looking great. Nothing wrong with this trend. We have been on a breakneck trend. We'd assume it should shallow out. I'm on a weekly view, and I am showing you this red line right here. This is actually the longer-term trend with Nvidia, as shocking as that may sound. Not to say we'll make one of these beeline moves back down to $8 per share. Certainly, if there is a massive drying up in demand for GPUs, or World War III breaks out, well, maybe that's what ends up happening. But we're seeing no evidence of that. But you have to expect with Nvidia some flattening out in trend. That's what's represented by this purple line. What we would like to see with Nvidia, there were highs that were made all along here in November and December and earlier this year. You need to get above kind of the 150 level. You need to push up above 150, and that would convince me that this purple trend line is still intact. I'm still long Nvidia, still long the SOXX. That's more of a trade. Got other semiconductor positions as well. That was the semiconductor show, folks, for Sunday, January 26th. Hopefully you guys enjoyed today's video. Back again next week. There'll be a lot of earnings this week, a lot of news to discuss. Stay tuned to the channel. We'll have more. Good luck with your investments.